Inferno sugli altipiani, which translates from Italian into Hell on the Plateau. This is a game published by the Italian wargame magazine Parabellum, and the magazine is entirely in Italian, so probably that will narrow the appeal of the magazine to international audiences. On the other hand, the game, while also described and illustrated in Italian in the magazine, has available English rules. You can find them online. So if you're interested about the topic, if the game seems interesting to you, you may consider investing in the magazine, even if you will not read the magazine just for the game. And I know that in the past I have purchased board game magazines only for the game. Speaking about the magazine, though, in case you're interested in reading it, there's something quite interesting about it, which is that the magazine seems to be monothematic. When you purchase a wargame magazine with a game in it, usually you will find in a magazine a large array of topics, maybe articles that go from the Peloponnesian War to the American Civil War to Okinawa. And then you have a game which may or may not have to do with any of these topics, so it usually comes with one accompanying article. Not here, because the game is about World War I, and so is the magazine. Like, every article is about the design or the history of games about this topic. So this could be particularly interesting if you do have an interest in this topic. Again, it's a specialized wargame magazine, which is not a very common approach. As for the game itself is a two-player game, but it has limited hidden information, so actually it can easily be played as a solitaire game, simply by a single player controlling both sides at the best of their possibilities. You don't lose much if you lose that the element of hidden information. The game depicts an Austro-Hungarian offensive during World War I against the Italians. It is set in a mountain landscape, so it has all sorts of particular problems that comes on this type of particular environment. This terrain that needs to be negotiated, action that tends to be channeled along specific paths that are available, and whereas maneuvering around and over mountains is not always that attractive. So there are all of these interesting elements. The Austro-Hungarians are coming. The game starts with the Austro-Hungarians already like next to the Italians, ready to hit. They managed to get in position without the Italians really figuring out what was going on. So you're going to have the first impact of the Austro-Hungarian offensive, and then both sides will bring in reinforcements as the Austro-Hungarians try to push against the Italians, and the Italians try to stop the advance of their enemies. This is the general idea behind the game, behind Hell on the Plateau. Let me show you how the game works. The map of the game is printed on paper, fairly thick, very nice and resistant paper. As for the organization of the map, yeah, the color palette is a little bit drab, it's not super exciting, but the map is very functional, it works very well. And it shows what is the most relevant element of the geography here, which is the change in elevation in different areas of the map. Here, for example, we have a peak, and then the different colors of the axis show us how the mountain declines, and so it's easy to identify valleys. They also correspond to the net of roads and paths on the map. So it's very easy to read, and the map is very important precisely because of the peculiar configuration of the area with all these mountainous areas. Then there are certain parts of the map corresponding to the valleys and the roads that attract a lot of attention. They channel the action. Of course, you can also spend extra time and effort moving in less hospitable areas, but that presents its own set of problems. The units in the game are represented by these cardboard counters, light gray for the Austro-Hungarians and light green for the Italians. I hope you can see the difference in color. If you're playing the evening with an artificial light, well, be sure that it's a bright light, because sometimes the colors tend to blend a little bit. Here on the side, if the unit has a number, that number is the artillery value. Then we have attack value, defense value, and movement. Fairly standard organization. On the counters, we have infantry, and then we have some special units such as forts and artillery pieces. When the game starts at setup, you will have two lines of pieces. Around here you will have a line of Italian defendants, and adjacent to them there will be a line of of Austro-Hungarians that are right there at the beginning. The Italians hadn't seen them coming, and so the game starts with the two sides being close to one another with a smaller number of units of the two sides in the background. But there will be a lot of attention in this area here at the beginning of the game, which is the beginning of the Austro-Hungarian offensive. The turn structure is fairly standard, as you may expect from most war games, especially I would say low complexity entry-level war games. At the beginning, first a player takes their turn, then the other player takes their turn. Each player's turn starts with a supply phase in which the active player needs to demonstrate that the units are in supply. They can trace an uninterrupted line of supply to supply source, otherwise they suffer penalties. Then you have reinforcements, and those are very important. The flow and schedule reinforcement is really what defines gameplay. There will be a lot of Italian reinforcements coming up during the game, and not nearly as many Austro-Hungarian reinforcements. Most Austro-Hungarian units are on the board at the beginning of the game. The Italians will get a punch or 10 at the beginning, first turn or two, just to simulate the surprise of the offensive, but then they'll keep receiving reinforcements that will come out from here, from this edge, even from this area here. So as the game progresses and new Italian units come in, of course they will be able to reinforce the wavering Italian front and also to threaten the flanks, because the Austro-Hungarians are trying to move down to take control of valuable areas down here to score victory point, but as they move down, of course, their flank on this side may become exposed. So interesting situation there, I would say. Interesting overall architecture of the game as determined by the schedule of the reinforcements, again mainly Italian reinforcements that will join the fight during the game. After the reinforcement phase, you have a movement phase in which the active player moves their units on the map, fairly standard, you know, from X to X, spending movement points. The number of movement points that is spent changes with the type of terrain. Also, zones of control will affect movement. Units project zones of control in the 6 axes surrounding them with some restrictions. Zones of control will force the opponent that moves into one of them to spend extra movement points. There is also an extra expenditure of movement points for exiting a zone of control, and therefore also for entering and exiting in the same move. Also, speaking of zones of control, during the game there will be game effects that may give a unit a loss in efficiency, which can be 1 point of efficiency that is lost, 2 points of efficiency that reduces the combat capability of the unit that suffers that penalty. It is also possible, if you're far enough from enemy units, to spend 4 movement points, so that turn you to move much, to reduce your combat effectiveness loss by 1 level. So -2 becomes a -1, and a -1 is removed. And these losses of efficiency are sort of like intermediate damage before a unit takes a step loss. Most units have 2 steps, so the unit can be in full strength or reduced strength. And if a unit that is at reduced strength on its reduced side loses another step, then the unit is eliminated. So basically there will be game effects that may give a unit 1 loss of efficiency, 2 losses of efficiency if a unit has already a -2 in combat efficiency and takes another hit, then that is removed, and that loss of efficiency is converted in the loss of a step. So timing things out so that you can reduce the combat efficiency losses is vital to keep your units in the game. That also means that you will have sometimes a main area where people are fighting, and from time to time then people move to the back to regain strength, to regain efficiency, and then they go back into the fray, into the mess, into the fight. I'm just putting pieces there randomly. I'm not checking that there is like core cohesion and stuff like that. And just to give you a sense of how the map looks when there are nice units moving around. So movement, fairly standard. You move. I mean, what else? What is there? You move, and so you move your pieces. After movement is resolved, then units of the active player can attack units of the opponent. There are restrictions based on military formations and cohesion and stacking and the sort of thing. But the general idea is a very well-known one, which is you can pile up units of the attacker and attacking units or stacks of units within a hex of the opponent, and in all of your units that are in position to attack can do so. When you are attacking, you use a fairly conventional, fairly traditional combat result table based on combat odds. So you divide the combat attack values of the attacker by the combat defense value of the defender. You turn them into a ratio 1 to 1, 1 to 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1. I always like, by the way, the presence of this column, which you do not see in every combat result table. I just like to have something between the 1 to 1 and 2 to 1. It's just fun. That gives me that extra level of detail and nuance. Because really, sometimes you're like, almost a 2 to 1, 1 point is missing. It just seems silly that you drop down to 1 to 1. So you look at the column that best corresponds the ratio in force between attacker and defender. That can be modified if there is a flank attack. You are able to perform a flank attack if you are threatening 5 of the axes that surround an enemy, and you do so by occupying 5 of those axes or projecting zones of control in those axes. And if you meet the requirements and you're able to perform a flank attack, then hooray, you get a shift of 2 columns. How do you then you roll dice and you compare and you cross-reference the result with the column that you're using. And how you read the results? So, well, the result on the left of the slash is applied to the attacker, and the other result on the right is applied to the defender. R means a retreat, and the number next to the R indicates the length of the retreat. These are the numbers +1, +2, etc., etc. Those are modifiers that are applied to the actual table that determines the losses. So this pretty much determines if the retreats are gonna happen, and then of course you need to perform those, and the modifiers that you will use when you roll on the table that actually determines the losses that are taken by the 2 sides. You look at these 2 columns and you choose the one that describes the size of the confrontation. A confrontation which is 6 steps, which includes the 6 combat steps or fewer, is resolved on this table. A confrontation that has more steps than that is resolved on this table. You roll a single die for both sides, but then you apply different modifiers. So the defender, you roll a die, which maybe you're rolling on this column, and maybe you rolled a 4, but the attacker has -2 on that roll, and the defender has +3. So one of them will get a 7 and the other one will get a 2, although there's only 1 roll. And those modifiers are based on the modifier that you gain from here, plus modifiers based on the number of artillery points that a side is bringing to the fight. Flank attacks may give a +2 on that table, and being unable to retreat brings another modifiers there, and so on and so forth. Attacking at a higher level than 4 to 1 also brings a modification there. But I like the idea that there is a single die roll which is then modified based on the circumstances of the fight, so that in any case there seems to be a general balance there. Yes, a side could take a lot more losses than the opponent, but it doesn't as ridiculous as it could happen in other games. If I roll a 1 and then I have negative modifiers, and you roll a 6 and then you have positive modifiers. The losses that are taken, based again on the result of the roll for the losses, are applied to your units again in terms of loss of combat effectiveness and or actual step losses when there is a combat effectiveness loss of -2 and a further level of combat effectiveness loss is applied. You continue like this, turn after turn, supplies, reinforcements, movement, attack for both sides until the end of the scenario, and at that point victory is determined based on victory points. Only the Austro-Hungarian player scores victory points. The Italian player is trying to prevent the Austro-Hungarian player from scoring victory points. Victory points are scored based or prevented by the Italian player based on elimination of enemy units. Also, points are scored based on occupation of key areas on the board, and depending on how many points the Austro-Hungarian player has accrued by the end of the game, you determine the level of victory or defeat for each player. There isn't a single victory condition or single victory situation or single loss situation. Or defeat situation. What I like is that there are various levels, like in real military confrontations. It's not just a victory or a defeat. You can have a Italian strategic victory, tactical Italian victory, a draw, a Austro-Hungarian tactical victory, Austro-Hungarian strategic victory. So there are different levels of success or defeat for the two sides. This is a game that comes with a Word Game magazine, and usually when we talk about magazine games, we apply slightly different parameters. From magazine games, we don't expect, how can I call them, great classics, games that you can replay a million times. 20 years from now, you'll still be playing them, once per month or so, and they're never done telling all the things that they have to tell you. Usually we tend to think of these games as more limited in scope, which is something that has its own advantages, because precisely because of this, then these games very often can cover topics that a publisher would not invest into put in a big box set that would have less appeal. So sometimes you have more obscure topics, or topics that because of their structure do not have a lot of replay value. For example, you have topics that because of the initial placement, because of the schedule reinforcement, and sometimes because of the nature of terrain, will tend to develop along similar lines every time that you play the game. I wouldn't say that they feel scripted, but they have maybe more limited flexibility. Hell on the Plateau is one similar game which fits very well in a magazine game, would probably not work very well in an expensive box set in which all you get is this. Yeah, you get the magazine, and if you can read it, good for you. And then you get a game that probably will play a couple of times. I don't know, there will be, again, a classic. If it is for you, that's great. But it seems to me a little more limited in scope, which again is not necessarily a minus, given the advantages that this format allows you, as I said, to cover topics that probably wouldn't be covered in Word Gaming. Otherwise, it is not a minus necessarily. It is something that you have to keep in mind. That the situation here is fairly constrained by the material factors. It's not a game about the Eastern Front in World War II, where you can attempt vastly different strategies. The paths between the mountains will constrain the action along certain lines. The initial placement and the schedule of reinforcements also will create particular clusters of actions that may change from time to time, will change from time to time, but not immensely. This being said, it is a solid magazine game. The game engine works. The system is simple enough, but it has a couple of interesting twists. The fact that you roll on a table to find the modifier when you roll on another table sounds more cumbersome than it is, and it really has the nice effect in the end of creating results that have a variance within a certain range. So again, it doesn't happen that a side loses 100 million pieces and the other side 0, which would be silly. You have variety there, but within a range that makes sense, since the damage that the players receive is based on a single die roll that is shared by both, although then you apply different sets of modifiers. I find that to be a very interesting element. Also, the overall narrative is pretty interesting because you have the initial impact, which may result in different types of bad situations for the Italians, and then the Italians are trying to recover from there. So there is a nice back and forth. The Italians are the defenders overall, but there are different things that they can attempt. This being said, I found the game to be fairly hard for the Austro-Hungarian player. Because yes, the initial impact is great, it's awesome. You punch a couple of nice gaps in the Italian lines, so basically you break the line and you turn it into a bunch of clusters of units and you start maneuvering around them to try to surround them, which is not easy given the specific nature of the mountainous terrain. However, as you're trying to do so and you're already celebrating a little bit, the Italians bring in reinforcements and it's not that hard for them to fill in the gaps. And then all of a sudden you find, as the Austro-Hungarian player, your initial wave of attack weakened, as it's natural, by the impact against a reformed Italian front that at that point is particularly hard to puncture, to dislodge. The Italians, as they come from one side at that point, they can threaten your flank. So there's that problem there. I found it to be a little hard for the Austro-Hungarian player. Some advantage, of course, if you're playing the game solo, that's not much of a big deal. Then you simply identify with the side that has a harder time. You identify with the Austro-Hungarians and you try to solve the puzzle of winning the game. As a two-player game, again, maybe you have two players with different skills, abilities, and familiarity with wargaming, then it's perfectly fine. The most experienced player gets the side that has the hardest challenge. However, this is something that, you have to keep in mind. And it seems I'm not the only player that got this impression, so much so that I talk about this with the publisher, and the publisher told me that other people have expressed similar opinions, and the magazine next issue is gonna publish an article about the strategy, which seems will explain how the game is very balanced, and as long as the Austro-Hungarian player plays in advance, plays well, follows certain ideas and general concepts, the Austro-Hungarian player should be able to win as easily as the other side. Which, however, in a certain sense seems to me like if you're saying that if the Austro-Hungarian player is particularly careful, plans particularly well, then the Austro-Hungarian player can win. It seems to me another way of phrasing that winning from that side is less intuitive, which still means that it's a little harder than the other side. But this is just semantics. In truth, it seems that for most players approaching the game, the Austro-Hungarian side will appear to be more challenging. Maybe the article next issue will address that. Other than that, again, there's still those two uses that I mentioned, solo gaming and training gaming with players of different abilities. There's still these two uses that you can make of the game, in which having a game that is unbalanced is not necessarily a minus, it can even be an advantage. In those contexts, that can be a good thing actually to have. So, Hell on the Plateau. It's a game which is a magazine game, it's not a mind-blowing game, but as a game that comes as a companion to a magazine that depicts a very specific situation in an approachable, simple, beginner-friendly format, then I think it's a good game. It's a solid design. It has this element of true or apparent unbalance, or again, of true or apparent pretty challenging situation for one of the sides. We'll see if that is the case, but as you approach the game, chances are that you will find the Austro-Hungarian side a little harder to play. This being said, it's a good game. It has good production values for a magazine game. The magazine, if you can read it, is particularly well done. I found it to be very informed. I learned a lot about the history of wargaming, about World War I. It's very specialized, which again, for some people will be a great bonus. Finally, a magazine that just talks for 50 pages about this one thing that I love, but precisely also because of the hyper-specialization. Other people may be less attracted to it. So this, in general, is my assessment of Hell on the Plateau that comes with the Parabellum magazine, an Italian wargame magazine. It's fun to see also the Italians publishing wargame magazines. I know there are other ones, but this one seems to be more professional and just better put together than most other examples. Hell on the Plateau, Parabellum wargame magazine. Give it a try if what you saw in this video review seems to be appealing to you.